Well, let me tell a quick illustration from this slide. Bonnie and I have had the privilege of ministering in the last 12 months to several hundred missionaries that work on the front lines of Central Asia, the Middle East, Equatorial Sub-Sahara Africa, all over the world. And as we taught them, we met one doctor. And I'd like to tell you the story of this doctor because sin has consequences. This doctor was an American, amazing doctor that was trained, a surgeon who had a heart for missions, like many of you that are taking this course. He wanted to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, and so he finished med school, did his practice, learned and excelled as a doctor, and in his late 30s, he moved to one of the most desolate, needy, gospel absent countries of the world, one of those hard to enter countries, and he could only enter as a doctor. And so he went there to be a medical missionary in a closed country, a limited access country. And he worked very hard and got a team around him, and they built a hospital, and Americans contributed, and they started this hospital, and they started reaching out in the community, and they started translating the Bible. And as the ministry grew and as people were getting saved, teams started coming in to their hospital to help them from America. One team came and they decided they'd paint the hospital and they'd also do daycare so that all the doctors and all the nurses and families could spend extra time as couples. And so that team came, and while that team was there, his little daughter said to him, "Daddy, why that man touch me?" And the father said, "What are you talking about?" And to make a horrible story short, one member from the church missions team that was on child care duty molested his little tiny daughter. That doctor, as you see on that slide, got infected with bitterness. The first thing he did is he looked up and he said, "God, how could you let my little, helpless, innocent, precious daughter get defiled by that wicked man?" Then he said to his wife, "How come you weren't watching our daughter?" Then he started getting irritated at all the other doctors and nurses. And before long, when we met him, he had decided to resign, close the hospital, and end the work in that desolate part of the world with no gospel witness. Now, the way I met him is I had been invited every morning to do a Bible lesson, and for 45 minutes challenge, a room filled. That group was about 750 doctors from 64 different countries. And I was preaching along and I was telling them about the Lord's Prayer. And at that conference, I was doing the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, and I began showing on the screen when it says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And I said, "Did you know what? If you're not a forgiving person, you'll get infected with," and on the screen, I put up a chart about the symptoms of bitterness. And I just started going through the signs, actually. It was called the signs of bitterness. And I was going through, and I was on about the third one, and this doctor told me that he'd been sitting there, he wouldn't listen, he didn't open his Bible, no one noticed because there were several, 750 of them out there, and he was looking at the floor, but he couldn't help but listening, and by about the third sign of bitterness, he looked up, and he started looking at that screen, and he started thinking, and he said to me, he turned to his wife, and he said, "Is that me?" His wife told me that she froze. Because for the last year, he had been so bitter that he was violently angry. He just would explode for anything. He'd get so upset and impatient and troubled and irritated with everybody in the hospital and with his children and with his marriage was struggling. So she thought, if I say yes, he'll explode and get angry at me, she thought. But if I don't say anything, this might be my only chance. So that faithful wife breathed a quick prayer and looked at her husband and said, "That is you on the screen." I went through the rest of the signs of bitterness, but he told me he didn't even listen to the rest of the sermon. He said he bowed his head, and right there sitting in that service said, God, I confess, I got angry at you and blamed you for not protecting my daughter. Then I got angry at my wife and blamed her. Then I got angry at the whole ministry, and then I quit. And he said, I was bitter. Bitterness is sin. And sin infected my life. That doctor said he had taken so many steps away from God. Months had gone by, but it was just one step back. Right there, sitting in that service, he bowed his head. He said, I was wrong. I confess. I ask you to cleanse me. And he said, when he lifted his head, he was a different person. The infection was gone. His wife realized it, his co-workers. And by the way, he went to the mission and said, I'm not closing the hospital. Satan allowed me to get infected with bitterness, trying to stop the ministry. Here's the lesson. No matter how many steps we take away from God, it's always and only one step back. That one step is called repentance.